All right. Welcome, everybody. This is day 2. We're in week 9, and we're going to be doing module 3, lesson 1 notebook today. All right. So because we had that amnesty day and stuff, we are going to be doing a lot of that in class today, getting it done. I'll have the review sheet for you. So we've quickly been chatting. I forgot to start recording before I started it. What does the words civil rights mean to you? So go ahead in the chat. You can pause this video if you're watching it back in the chat during class, since I'm going to be gone on Thursday. What does civil rights mean to you? The conclusion we came to, we had some really good examples: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, for religion and from religion, freedom of assembly, and I really liked one description, which is like natural rights the government can't take away. And in essence, civil rights are protections from government overreach. They protect our freedoms from the government trying to take it away from us and suppress us. And we'll look at specifically what some of those are today. All right. As I mentioned, I found this cute reel, so please have a sense of humor, all right? But it's over dramatized, but it is what teachers experience when we ask students to do something sometimes. So have a good sense of humor with this. I found it funny.
I almost died. That was so scary.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right.
Oh my God, I almost died.
No.
I almost died. That was so scary.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all right.
If I had $1 for every time I ask students to, write a paragraph or write a sentence, like, you want me to do a whole sentence? It's like, oh my goodness. So I'm the only one that finds that funny. I thought we agreed we're going to be morally supportive here. I thought you guys would find it funny. All right, fine. I'll do that.
I feel like you have a TikTok account and you probably scroll on TikTok for like 2 hours straight just looking at teachers and students.
Type essays in the group chats. Yeah, right. Lance, right? Yes. I do not have a tick. I'm not a tick. This reel I promise. Especially fighting about something. Yes, right. You guys love to chat when there's something you're interested in, but when I ask you to respond to something constructively, right? It's asking too much. So today I'm going to be asking. We got to get to it. We're going to do our full responses, and we're going to do really well starting out second quarter. All right, here we go.
Yeah, it's okay to be a TikTok teacher. It's nothing wrong with that.
No, I think it's great. I just don't have time for it. I got, my goodness, I barely have time to watch my shows. So, okay, it's though I follow some funny teachers, so it's good. All right, let's jump over into Canvas, and we're going to get our notebook started. All right. So have Canvas open. I am going to move at kind of a fast pace because, again, we do have a lot we need to get through. So we're going to be in Module 3, Lesson 1, and we're looking at equal rights and liberties. So what grants us these? So what are they? What are civil rights? What are civil liberties? And then how are they given to us? What in the Constitution, in the government, right, gives us these rights? Okay, so once we're here, we're going to go to the next page. We're going to open up our notebook. Okay, so you're going to click on that link, open it up. Once it's open, remember, you're going to do the 2 things that you always need to do. You're going to save it to your Google Drive. Okay, so right here, save it to your Google Drive, save it to your government folder, and then you want to make it shareable, right? So that when you submit it, I'm able to grade it. So right down here, anyone with the link. Okay, so those are the things that you want to make sure that are done. All right, first thing you can do once you have this open is you can go down to 8 and 9 and you can delete them. All right, so you can literally highlight them and you can delete them. Don't delete number 7 here. Okay, you can delete them. So 8 and 9, you may get rid of them. All right, so give me a thumbs up once you have it open and you've deleted 8 and 9. And again, please try to stick with me. We need to be quick because we are doing pretty much a whole notebook today. So it's a lot we're going to do. So Module 3, Lesson 1 notebook, have it open and make it shareable, and then delete that 8 and 9. Awesome. I'll give about 1 more minute, and I'm going to go right into it. So again, you may delete number 8 and 9. So get rid of them, or you can just type do not do. It's up to you. So either take them off or delete them. So I told you we'd shorten it up a little bit so that we could get through more today in class, and since we had that Amnesty Day the other day. All right, I'm going to keep going because, again, a lot we have to get to today, all right? So please just make sure that you're with me, you're not tuning out, all right? Because the more you're with me, then you'll be able to get this done in class. All right, let's go find our supporting question, what this is all about. So the supporting question that this is all about is, does treating people equally mean treating them the same? All right, I'll put this in the chat. And you're going to put that right here in your supporting question. Does treating people equally mean treating them the same? Hard one to think about, right? You might immediately say yes, but let's go through the lesson and see if you still feel that way. Okay, we're going to watch the civil rights and civil liberties video. They do a really good job of just summarizing what are civil rights, what are civil liberties, because there is a difference. They're very similar, but there is a difference between the two, all right? And then we're going to go over that key vocab. So while we're watching the video, I am going to copy and paste the vocab into the chat, all right? So here we go.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today we're finally, at long last, moving on from the structures and branches of government and onto the structures and branches of trees. This is a nature show now. Okay, we're not moving on completely because we're still talking about courts, but today we'll be discussing actual court decisions and the kinds of things that courts rule on rather than how they do it. That's right, we're moving on to civil rights and civil liberties. Okay, first I want to talk about something that I find confusing, the difference between civil rights and civil liberties. Usually in America we use the terms interchangeably, which adds to the confusion, but lawyers and political scientists draw a distinction, so you should know about it. Then you can go back to calling civil liberties rights and civil rights liberties, and most people won't care. But I'll care. I'll be disappointed in you. So civil liberties are limitations placed on the government. Basically, there are things the government can't do that might interfere with your personal freedom. Civil rights are curbs on the power of majorities to make decisions that would benefit some at the expense of others. Basically, civil rights are guarantees of equal citizenship, and they mean that citizens are protected from discrimination by majorities. Take, for example, same-sex marriage. You could think of it as a liberty, except that not everyone is free to marry at any given time. 6-year-olds can't get married, and you can't marry your sibling. But same-sex marriage is a civil rights issue because in the states that don't allow it, the majority of voters is denying something to a minority, creating inequality in the way that the laws work. Now, just to make things more confusing, lawyers often talk about the difference between substantive and procedural liberties, but they usually call them rights instead of liberties. It's a lawyer eagle. A legal eagle. Substantive liberties are limits on what the government can do. For example, the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law establishing religion. So this means that they cannot create a national church or declare that Christianity or Islam or Hinduism is the official religion of the U.S. Procedural liberties are limits on how the government can act. For example, in America, in courtroom dramas, there's a presumption that someone is innocent until proven guilty. This presumption means that in criminal cases, juries and judges have to act as though the accused is innocent until the prosecution convinces them otherwise. If they are not convinced, the accused person doesn't go to prison. So now that we understand the difference between civil rights and civil liberties perfectly because of my amazing explanation, let's focus on the liberties and try to figure out what they are and where they come from, with some help from Thought Bubble. So civil liberties are contained in the incredibly unhelpfully named Bill of Rights, which isn't even called that in the Constitution. It's just the name we give to the first 10 amendments. The 9th Amendment is included to remind us that the list of liberties and or rights in the other amendments isn't exhaustive. There might be other rights out there, but the Constitution doesn't specifically say what they are. Thanks, Constitution. In some cases, it's pretty clear. The First Amendment, for example, says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or abridging the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or to assemble or to infringe the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Pretty straightforward. But other cases are not so clear. The Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but it doesn't say by whom. Same thing with the Fifth Amendment guarantees against self-incrimination. Could Congress force you to incriminate yourself? How would they do that? And the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishments, like presumably shock pens. But it doesn't say who is forbidden from cruelly and unusually punishing. My mom wasn't forbidden from keeping me from playing video games. As usual, we might expect the Supreme Court to sort out this mess, but initially they were no help at all. In a case you've probably never heard of called Barron versus Baltimore, decided in 1833, the court said that the Bill of Rights applied to the national, meaning federal government, not to the states. They said that every American has dual citizenship, but not the good kind. They meant that you are a citizen of the U.S. and of the state in which you reside, and basically that the Constitution only protected you from the federal government. In other words, if the state of Indiana wanted wanted to punish me cruelly or unusually, they could. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So Barron versus Baltimore left Americans in a bit of a civil liberties pickle. And not the good kind of pickle. They were protected from the national government doing terrible things like quartering troops in their homes, but not from the state doing the same thing. And since the state was close to home and the national government was far away and compared with today, tiny and weak, these protections were pretty weak sauce. So what happened to change this? I hope something, because I like a zesty government sauce. The 14th Amendment and the Supreme Court happened. After the Civil War, as part of Reconstruction, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were added to the Constitution. Of these, the 14th is the most important, probably the most important of all amendments. What does it say? Well, the first section, which is the one that really matters, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, okay? It reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." What this means is that the federal government's like, listen, states, you can't be dumb. Just stop it. Okay, we're all in this together, all right? It means states can't deny equal protection, civil rights, or due process, which in this case encompasses civil liberties. This, in theory, makes it impossible for states to infringe upon the liberties in the Bill of Rights. But the legal system being what it is, it's not quite that simple. Did you think it'd be simple? The Supreme Court could have just ruled that all the rights and liberties in the Bill of Rights applied to the states, which seems to be what the 14th Amendment implies, but they didn't. Instead, they ruled that each of the rights or liberties had to be incorporated against the states on a case-by-case basis. This is a concept called selective incorporation, and it supposedly reserves more power to the states. What it really means is that when people felt that the states were violating their liberties, they had to go to the Supreme Court, which by now has incorporated almost every clause in the Bill of Rights against the states. You want examples? We got them. In the famous case of Gitlow versus New York, the court ruled that the First Amendment protection of freedom of speech could not be violated by a state. In this case, it was New York, but once a liberty is incorporated against one state, it's incorporated against all of them. In Mapp versus Ohio, the court ruled that states couldn't use evidence gathered from warrantless searches. In Benton versus Maryland, the right against double jeopardy, being tried for the same crime twice, was incorporated against the states. By now, almost all the rights and liberties mentioned in the first 10 amendments have been incorporated against the states. This means that individuals are protected from all their governments taking away their liberties, and that's a good thing. I loves my liberties. So we'll be talking about civil rights and civil liberties for a number of episodes, and this topic, while confusing, can be lots of fun. We might play liberties bingo, or civil rights kickball. I don't know what those things are, but they sound like fun. The main thing to remember is that going all the way back to the framers, Americans have been concerned about a too powerful government taking away citizens' freedoms. Yes, these liberties apply mostly to citizens, although some do apply to non-citizens too. In order to put limits on government, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution in 1789. But this didn't mean that those limits applied to the states, probably because the founders expected states to be the main protectors of rights. And in fact, many state constitutions have provisions that copy or in some ways go beyond what's in the U.S. Constitution. Only after the 14th Amendment was passed following the Civil War did the national government get around to addressing this issue of states denying people's liberties. Even then, it took numerous court cases for us to get to the point that most of the liberties that we assume cannot be taken away by the government have actually been guaranteed through the process of selective incorporation. It's taken a long time to get where we are, and there's still a long way to go. Protecting civil liberties requires vigilant citizens to be aware of the ways their government is overstepping its bounds, but that's only half the equation. It's also vital that our majority pay attention to the civil rights of others, and that we ensure that everyone is afforded the same protections and benefits promised by our system of law. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course.
Okay, so if you weren't following, I was putting 1 through 5, the key vocab, in the chat. So make sure that you're copying and pasting those over into your context clue and your definitional hypothesis. So I'll go over the vocab while you do that. All right, and I even labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. Oh, we have a checking for understanding question. The first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution are basically rights granted to, and that is U.S. citizens. So they are meant specifically for us, okay? Not everyone in the world. So yes, immigrants who do not have full, U.S. citizenship aren't granted the same rights. They're granted a lot of rights, but to fully experience the civil rights, civil liberties, okay, and stuff, the highest level of that is for U.S. citizens. Okay, so there's 5 key vocab words. So again, pulling these from the chat and stuff while I go through them. Okay, so infringement on an individual freedom of assembly by the government. So infringement means to violate, to take away. The Fifth Amendment provides many protections except for the right of counsel, okay? So later, this is something that was guaranteed to defendants, the right of counsel if you couldn't afford a lawyer, that you could consult when one would be provided to you. They're known as public defenders. So they're paid for by the taxpayers, but that way everyone has representation, knows their legal rights, and someone advocating on their behalf. Inhibit. The First Amendment prevents Congress from promoting or inhibiting any faith. So we talked about this in our opener, right? Protection for religion, so people can practice whatever religion want. They're not forced into a certain religion, but also from religion, that they can't force you to be in a religion. So if you choose to be non-religious, that is your choice. If you want to select this religion or that religion, that is your choice. Incriminate. The right to refuse to testify for risk of incriminating yourself. So you cannot be forced to testify in a trial where you are on trial, where you could get yourself in trouble. And then finally, resonate. How did Benjamin Franklin's words resonate with our country? So resonate means to feel powerful, to make sense, belief, to back up, to feel like, yes, I believe that. That summarizes how I feel when something resonates. You're like, yes, I agree with that. Okay, give me a thumbs up once you have your vocab in. Like I said, we're moving pretty quick today. It's stuff, but we do have a lot to get through. All right, so it's important you're sticking with me. So as I put in the chat, and the key difference, so the key big thing picture you want to know, what is the difference between civil liberties and civil rights? So I put this in the chat, okay? So civil liberties are protections given to us by the government. So the government protecting us, okay? Civil rights are protections from the government. So from the government overreach into our lives, okay? That if I am arrested, I have the right to counsel. I don't have to incriminate myself. I don't have to speak to the police if I don't want to. The right to no unlawful search and seizure. They can't just come in my home because they don't like what I'm saying on social media. They have to have reason or cause, right? So it's protections that I can say what I want as long as I'm not threatening someone, and the government can't have retribution against me for that. So civil liberties are protection by the government, protections given to me by the government. Civil rights are protections from the government. So one is by, one is from. So kind of think of it as a two-way street. So a lot of times people interchange the terms and stuff like that, which, as he said, it's not that big of a deal, but it is really good to know the difference, all right? And knowing the difference, is empowering, all right? That, there is actually a difference. So civil rights is freedom's protection from the government. Civil liberties, protection by the government. So we're going to move on to the next section, and let's take a look at number 3, due process. What does it mean to be protected by due process of law? Okay, so what is due process? So I have a quick video, and then we'll talk about that. Lots of video clips today.
Finding it difficult to keep your
Summarizing
sales
our-
personnel motivated? Try Zoho CRM.
Brad,
Make selling fun.
what is due process?
There are certain individual rights that are recognized as absolute when it comes to modern society. And yes, these rights unfortunately include tweeting that you had a Caesar salad for lunch. Freedom of speech, after all. But another fundamental right is the right to due process. You may be familiar with the term since it's an integral part of American judicial philosophy, not to mention the Bill of Rights. In fact, it's the only command in the Constitution stated twice. But what does it mean exactly? Essentially, due process is the legal requirement that a government must respect all of a person's legal rights before taking from them, and I quote, life, liberty, or property. Specific elements of due process include the right to a notice of the charges against you, the opportunity to be heard, and the opportunity to defend yourself. When a system of law ignores any one of these steps before convicting someone, this constitutes a violation of due process and the rule of law. This is not a new idea, by the way. The very concept of due process was originally documented in the Magna Carta. No, the other one. Florida law, like most everywhere, includes, within the idea of due process, certain protections. For example, you can't be forced to testify against yourself. Due process also means no double jeopardy, which does not mean 2 doses of a TV trivia game show. It means being tried for the same offense twice. It must be remembered that due process only applies to the government, either state or federal, and not necessarily to, say, a private school disciplining a student. The one thing the idea of due process lacks is specifics. It doesn't really outline which exact processes are due. The basic idea is that someone accused of something should have a chance to face her accusers and give her side of the story. So most everyone agrees that, at a minimum, due process must include notice of the accusation, a hearing of some type, and a ruling. The particulars are usually covered in each jurisdiction's code of law for different types of cases. Nonetheless, due process is supposed to apply to all citizens without exception. If you think you're being prevented due process, or just want to find out more about it, visit LegalU, because you have a right to know your rights.
Okay. So yeah, due process includes quite a few things. So one, you can't be forced to testify against yourself if it's going to incriminate yourself. Double jeopardy means, so let's say I was tried for robbery and I was found innocent. Then they can't rearrest me for the same crime and try me again. So let's say that I got off the first time and then new evidence surfaced that I actually did do it, or, something like that. They can't rearrest me and try me again, and stuff. So, or if I'm found guilty of that robbery, and then for some reason it gets worse or they want to stack more charges on it, once I'm tried for it, it's done. So either way, whatever the outcome, they can't try you again for the same crime. Now, if I go and commit another robbery, right, then I can be tried for that, but you can't be tried twice for the same crime. Whatever the outcome, that is the outcome, all right? And it's protection from, again, people coming after you unnecessarily. So what does it mean to be protected by due process laws? All right, the concept of due process goes all the way back to the Bill of Rights, and then later with the adding of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. It includes many important procedures. So I just put this in the chat. Many important procedures for people accused of crimes, like making sure everyone has the right to a fair trial, protection, the right to not have to testify, say no to testifying, stop the government from enforcing or taking freedoms away of your rights and your property, and also double jeopardy. Okay, once we're done with that, we'll go down, we'll do the checking for understanding. Like I said, I am going to kind of keep moving quickly because we do have a lot to get through. Procedural due process guarantees are set and consistent process and procedures. So the whole goal of procedural process is that everyone is getting consistent process and procedures. Okay, so they're not making exceptions, which could be discriminatory. So maybe because of your race or your gender or your affiliation or religion or something like that, that everyone is given the same process and guidelines. Due process prevents the government from unfairly restricting individuals' life, liberty, and property. So they can't just come after you because you're speaking against the government. There has to be, so the difference is if I was posting, I can't stand the president, and saying all these things versus I'm going to kill the president, I'm going to, right, making direct threats, then I've just given them cause, right, to violate my life, liberty, and property. But just saying I don't like something, that does not give them the right. So there's very strict guidelines that they have to follow, right, if they are going to violate someone's life, liberty, property, aka arrest them, charge them with a crime, put them in jail. That can't just be done for any reason. All right. Due process is mentioned in this amendment of the Constitution. So the Fifth Amendment. So in the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, in the Fifth Amendment deals with due process and the right to due process and protecting us from government overreach. So it says it right, so Fifth Amendment, required of a grand jury to hear the case and see if there's enough to actually prosecute. Protection from double jeopardy, can't be tried twice. Protection from self-incrimination, and just compensation if the government takes private property for public use. In addition to the federal government, why do the states have to protect due process rights of criminal suspects? Because the Supreme Court has used the 14th Amendment to incorporate those rights on state level. So remember how we talked about how federal law supersedes state laws in a lot of different ways. So this is one of them. We don't want states going rogue. In one state, you get a fair trial, and another, they can do double jeopardy. So in this case, states' autonomy has been taken away, which is a good thing because we want to ensure that wherever you're committing a crime, wherever you're being tried, or if you didn't commit a crime and you're being tried, that you hopefully would have a fair trial and be able to prove your innocence, or if you're guilty, that they can prove that, but it's done in a correct way. The Fifth Amendment provides all the following guarantees except, so the right to a grand jury indictment, protection against self-incrimination, and protection from double jeopardy. So those are all listed right up here. The one it does not protect against or guarantee is right to counsel. So that's been added later. It's also something that is guaranteed now, but it wasn't originally guaranteed in the Fifth Amendment. In simple terms, due process seeks to guarantee the government acts within its legal limits. It treats all people fairly with respect to their rights. So again, trying to reduce any sort of discrimination and stuff as much as possible. All right, we're gonna go to First Amendment, and let's jump over in our notebook. Okay, so the First Amendment. Identify 5 freedoms established in the First Amendment of the Constitution. So the very first part of the Bill of Rights, which is the 10 amendments of the Constitution, all right? So the first things protected, and people love to, this is probably the most quoted amendment behind the Second Amendment, freedom of speech, press, assembly, religion, and petition. So in that one amendment, there are so many things that are protected. Freedom of speech, press, so this is printed work and things like that. Assembly, so the right to come together. Religion, for and from, right? And then petition, to make change, to protest. So these are big deals that in not all countries do you have these kind of rights. We have some of the most progressive freedom of speech, freedom of press, and things like that in the world at the time then and even now. The ability to disagree, to live independently. Okay. So now we're going to look at school rights. So this is kind of fun. What happens to students' rights when they step onto school grounds? So it's easy to say, I have my freedom of speech and da-da-da. And I've even had a student who was way back in the day, it was probably my 2nd or 3rd year of teaching, super rude, disrespectful, and loved to quote, well, you can't do anything about it. It's my freedom of speech. And the reality is when you're in school, being under 18 and in school, your rights actually are limited. They aren't the same rights as if you're out on the street corner. Okay, on the street corner, yeah, you can sit there and say, I hate Mrs. Hall and da-da-da, and I don't like her and stuff. But in the classroom, when you're within the school, actually your rights are going to be limited. And there's a bunch of court cases that dealt with the question of what is the limits of students' rights when you're in school setting. So we're going to look at some pivotal cases, and I have really quick video clips, and some of these are great. I mean, some of these are really entertaining. So hang with me, all right? This is the part of the lesson that I actually really enjoy, all right? And it's good to know. So the first one, what happens to students' rights when they go on ground? When students step onto public ground, they do not lose their constitutional rights at a schoolhouse gate. However, they do not have unlimited First Amendment rights. According to the Supreme Court, students do not possess the same level of constitutional rights as adults. So part of it's being underage. And then the other part of that is that you are in a public government funded building, right? Program, education that needs to function. And if you're disrupting and petitioning and protesting in the middle of class, right, we could never get anything done. So they are going to be limited. So you do have rights, but they're not unlimited. They're not the same as when you're 18 and you're outside of the school. So let's look at some specific cases that challenge what is the boundary? When do students have rights and when does the school have the right to say no? All right. And some of these are really, really interesting. All right. So we're going to jump over. So that's number 2 in part 4. So we're going to jump over. And we're going to look at 4 different cases that deal specifically with the First Amendment rights of students and challenge what rights do students have and where is that line. Okay, so here we go. So the first one is Tinker versus Des Moines. Okay, so here we go. So they're going to kind of give you a summary of what's going on, what the students did, and then why and how the courts ruled.
Supreme Court ruled that a public school forbidding students from wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War was a violation of the First Amendment rights.
So how does a seemingly subtle act of protest
Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so just real quick backstory. 1969, things were very contentious as far as ending the Vietnam War. And so you saw a lot of youth, because a lot of youth were being drafted and going to war. So there was a lot of pushback from the younger generation and really across generations, but particularly the younger generation wanting to leave the war. So this is about a form of protest by students in a school and the administration saying they didn't have the right to do it. They wore black armbands in protest as a visual way of stating, without verbally saying, right, but a visual sign, wearing these black armbands on their arm of protest. So this is about that struggle, and what did the Supreme Court say about that?
Result in such a momentous decision? And on what basis was the case decided? This is the story of Tinker versus Des Moines.
In 1965, Americans were divided in their support of the Vietnam War, with protests sprouting nationwide.
In Des Moines, Iowa, a group of students led by 15-year-old John Tinker, his sister Mary Beth, and their friend Christopher Eckert quietly carried out their own act of protest by wearing black armbands to school.
The school district prohibited the armbands, threatening suspension or expulsion if the students didn't comply. The Tinker family, active in civil rights and anti-war movements, were committed to protecting free speech and took the school district to court.
After the district court ruled against the Tinkers, the case was brought to the United States Court of Appeals, which resulted in a tie. The Tinker family would make one final appeal in 1968 to the Supreme Court.
With the lower level courts divided, how would our highest court come to a decision, and what would it mean for the Tinker family and other American students?
Attorney Dan Johnston took on the case for Tinker, arguing that the school district's armband policy was unconstitutional and violated the students' First Amendment rights.
He also maintained that since students have been granted constitutional protection of the right to symbolic expression in schools in the 1943 case of West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, the same reasoning should apply to the students' use of their armbands.
Opposition to the case was firm, arguing that the students' decision to wear the armbands was a disruption to the school's duty to maintain order, so much so that it outweighed their First Amendment rights.
The interpretation of the Constitution had been debated and a major decision was underway. Do First Amendment rights disappear when a student enters a public school?
According to the Supreme Court, that answer is no. The 7-2 count came with Justice Abe Fortas writing for the majority.
Fortas wrote that teachers and students, quote, do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate.
Fortas further argued that student expression cannot be suppressed when it doesn't interfere with school discipline.
That's really key right there. So that's going to be the sticking point. Student expression cannot be expressed when it does not interfere with school discipline. So if you're getting up in the middle class, screaming, yelling, interfering, right, then those freedoms can be suppressed or limited. But an armband, as long as you're in class doing what you're supposed to do, is not necessarily disruptive, okay? So that being the key part right there.
The dissent maintained that the Tinkers' behavior was a disruption, a sentiment echoed in future cases.
In 1986, the Supreme Court ruled that a student could be legally suspended for lewd speech. And in 1988, the court decided that it was within a school's power to censor student newspapers.
Turbulent political times often inspire protests, especially among passionate young people.
What will next test the limits of free speech?
So I think it's really interesting. So this case was really important because it has to do with, because you could argue that same thing, like what about a t-shirt, right, that has a certain message? What about a political t-shirt or a hat or something like that? So ways of protesting that aren't necessarily disrupting class, but might make people uncomfortable. What if you were a kid in the class whose dad or somebody was deployed in the Vietnam War? You know, that might make you uncomfortable to see someone protesting the war. But the point is that if it wasn't disrupting class, you can ignore that, right? You don't have to engage with that student. It's not physically disrupting class. Now, there's going to be other cases where, again, it's going to get really specific. What about school newspapers? What about speeches at school? Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so this first case, Tinker versus Des Moines, okay, independent community school. It's that the Supreme Court favored in favor of the students, stating that the students did not lose their First Amendment rights unless they are disrupting the educational process. So that was the really key thing here. The armbands, whether you liked them or not, didn't disrupt the educational process. So as long as they were participating, being compliant in class, the armband was not disrupting that environment. Just because you're uncomfortable with the message of the armband, if you didn't agree or you agree, it shouldn't keep you from learning. So that was the sticking point. Not all cases are going to go that way, though. So impact on students is This opens the environment for, you think in a lot of school settings that people can wear, like a club shirt, or I've seen students wear political shirts. I did a Washington, D.C. trip with seniors from Coronado High School my last year teaching there. And so we did, everything was political, right? And a lot of students, not a lot, I should say, some students wore kind of for both candidates. So some were wearing hats that were definitely promoting Biden, and some were wearing hats promoting Trump. And it became something that us leaders had to come together, because it kind of, again, it's like people have very passionate views and feelings. So would we allow that? So we did, as long as we had to talk to the students, and we said, you can wear these things as long as you are being respectful and we're not actually verbally debating. So as we are here to peacefully enjoy and learn about Washington, D.C. But great example of that, Okay, let's go to the next case. This one will blow your mind. This one is crazy. Okay, so pay attention. This one is the most entertaining for sure. For sure. So this is about a student that was going to give a class speech. They were like, they'll have to remind us. It's either they were running for like class president, or it was like a graduation speech. But either way, it was deemed by the administration inappropriate. And listen to why, all right, and stuff. So this is a really interesting case, and also very entertaining. Of all of them, this one is definitely the most entertaining. So you'll enjoy it. Even if you don't agree.
High school senior and champion debater Matthew Frazier had written an innuendo-laden speech nominating another boy for student body vice president. Two teachers with whom he'd shared a draft had warned him that it was inappropriate, but Frazier was too pleased with his own cleverness not to deliver it at the school assembly. Bethel School District versus Frazier is the United States Supreme Court's take on the school's response to this naughty speech. Frazier's short speech read in part as follows, quote,
Listen.
I know a man who is firm. He's firm in his pants. He's firm in his shirt. His character is firm. Jeff is a man who takes his point and pounds it in. If necessary, he'll take an issue and nail it to the wall. Jeff is a man who will go to the very end, even the climax, for each and every one of you. Unquote. During the assembly, some students hooted and yelled and made hand gestures. Others looked bewildered. A teacher ended up using class time to discuss Frazier's speech with her students. The next day, the assistant principal summoned Frazier to her office. She informed him that his speech had violated a school rule prohibiting conduct that materially and substantially interfered with the educational process, including the use of obscene or profane language. The school suspended Frazier and removed his name from the list of candidates for graduation speaker.
Those are graduation
Frazier sought review under the school district's grievance procedures. The hearing officer concluded that his speech was indecent, lewd, and offensive to the modesty of the audience, and affirmed the discipline. Frazier sued the school district in federal district court. The court held that the school had violated Frazier's First Amendment right to freedom of speech and his 14th Amendment right to due process. The Ninth Circuit affirmed, holding that Frazier's use of language to make a point was protected political speech. The United States Supreme Court granted cert. Matthew Frazier had written an
Okay, right? So technically, he didn't say anything, each word, there was no cuss words, things like that. But the combination thereof, right? The innuendo, right? And so this became a really, entertaining, right? I told you it was good, okay? But bad. You know what I mean? Who doesn't love a juicy story, right? So, and stuff. So again, where are those lines of freedom of speech? Okay. And so upholding this, yes, that you can't just get up. And of course we know, like, you can't cuss or say the F word or something like that, or cuss out your teacher. Like, that's not okay. But where is the line and the implication and the technically, right? He didn't use a 4-letter word or something like that, but the indication and the lewdness and the suggestiveness, right? And so this is a really interesting case. Plus it's just entertaining. All right. So Bethel School District versus Frazier. In summary, the case on the sexual suggestive speech during a school assembly. Can you imagine? He was suspended and he sued violation on stating The courts favored in favor of the school, stating that the school can limit lewd and vulgar speech. And the impact of this is, yeah, you can't, even if you're not, I didn't technically say the F word, I didn't technically cuss at you, you know what I mean? Innuendo, intention matters, composition of words matter. So this was a really big case because, again, he technically would argue, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't say a 4-letter word. I didn't say sex. I didn't say, think of inappropriate words of what he's implying, right? So yeah, that one's definitely entertaining, okay? So the impact is Fraser clarified that schools had the authority to restrict speech, especially, again, when it's disruptive. So the armbands weren't disruptive, but this definitely borders on and is disruptive. Okay, we got to keep going. Let's do another one. All right, we got a couple more to do. Okay, Hazelwood. After this done.
Introducing Acellus Gold Edition, the all-new Acellus Learning Accelerator.
Mr. Beat presents Supreme Court Briefs.
St. Louis, Missouri, May 10th, 1983. Robert Reynolds, the principal at Hazelwood East High School, looks over the page proofs that were to be published for The Spectrum, the school-sponsored newspaper. The Spectrum was a student newspaper published every 3 weeks as part of a Journalism 2 class. The class distributed around 4,500 copies not only to other students, but also sold copies to community members. Hazelwood School District paid for most of the costs of producing the newspaper, however. Normally, Principal Reynolds would be excited to read each new issue. However, this time he found 2 of the articles in the upcoming issue inappropriate. One story was about teen pregnancy and included interviews with students at Hazelwood East who had been pregnant. That said, the story used fake names for the girls. Reynolds thought that folks would still figure out who they were, though. Reynolds also thought the article's references to sex and birth control were not appropriate for younger kids at the school to read about. The second article dealt with divorce and also brought up personal things that might reveal embarrassing personal family matters involving the students interviewed for it. Now, instead of giving the students who reported on and edited the story a chance to respond, Reynolds went ahead and cut out the stories from the issue, and in doing so had to omit 7 articles from it. So instead of being a 6-page issue, it was a 4-page issue. The students only found out that the articles had been left out when the issue had been released on May 13th. The 3 students involved with the 2 articles were reporters Leslie Smart and Leanne Tippett, and the editor, Kathy Kohlmeyer. As you could imagine, they were very upset the articles didn't get published, especially since the Spectrum's advisor, Robert Sturgos, had previously approved them. Kohlmeyer, Smart, and Tippett all confronted Principal Reynolds about what he did. Reynolds told the girls that the stories were, quote, inappropriate, personal, sensitive, and unsuitable. Well, they were certainly not cool with that explanation and made copies of the deleted articles and distributed them to other students on school premises anyway. They were not punished for that, by the way. Later, arguing that the school had violated their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and freedom of the press, Kohlmeyer, Smart, and Tippett sued the school district and got their case to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Missouri. The district court agreed with Hazelwood, saying that because Hazelwood mostly paid for the newspaper, they could control what was in it. Kohlmeyer and the rest appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit, which reversed the lower court's decision, saying that nope, the newspaper was a, quote, public forum that went beyond the walls of the school. And wouldn't you know it, this time, Hazelwood appealed to the Supreme Court. It heard oral arguments on October 13th, 1987. Yep, by this time, the girls had long graduated from Hazelwood East High School. Still fighting, though. I like it. The big question, of course, was, did Principal Reynolds violate the students' First Amendment rights? The court said nope. In a 5-3 decision, the court announced on January 13th, 1988, that they had sided with Hazelwood, saying that yes, school administrators could censor school-sponsored expression like student newspapers, assembly assembly speeches, and the like if the censorship is, quote, reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical concerns. In other words, if it could potentially disrupt learning at school, the principal can prevent the expression. This idea, by the way, is called prior restraint. Oh, you lawyers and your fancy words. So yeah, since school administrators represent the state, they can jump in quite a bit to limit students from saying controversial stuff. That said, off-campus speech by students was still protected, so Kohlmeyer, Smart, and Tippett making photocopies and distributing the articles on their own was still okay. If you want to remember one thing about Hazelwood School District v. Kohlmeyer, it's that yes, schools can censor students if it's school-sponsored stuff.
So that's really key right there, okay? That if they had taken the articles of their own money and distributed them to students off campus, they had the right to do it. The school can't limit it. But the school is paying for the circulation of the newspaper. They are paying for the resources. They're paying for the copies, okay? And it's being circulated on and off campus with school money. Therefore, the school has the right to interfere and interpret what topics are considered appropriate and what topics are not. And so this was a really groundbreaking case because, again, it comes to jurisdiction. There's a lot of things students can do off campus without school money, right? But when you're on campus or using school government resources, then yes, your rights and things can be limited. And this is an example of that, okay? So I put this in the chat. I'm going to keep going. All right. So the impact is this case clarified that schools have more control over school-sponsored speech, such as newspapers, compared to student expression outside those contexts. So again, the big hiccup here is when it is school-sponsored. Okay. So like an assembly, they have the right to restrict your speech. Newspaper being paid for. So it's a class by the school. The teacher's paid for by the school. The resources are paid for by the printing's paid for by the school. Or like, let's say now it would be digital, a school website. They have the right to restrict that because it's school resources. If you're doing this outside of school in your own personal account, your own personal blog or something like that, then they cannot restrict you in the same way. All right, let's keep going. And our last case is going to be Mergens.
My name is Erica Olivares. I feel really honored to be a Pima Medical student.
Mr. Beat presents Supreme Court Briefs.
Omaha, Nebraska, 1985. A group of students at Westside High School wants to form a Christian Bible study club that would meet after school but on school grounds. One of the students, Bridget Mergens, asks the principal, James Finley, if they can do so, but he says no, saying the school could not allow a staff member to sponsor it. So Mergens and the rest of the students took the school district, Westside Community Schools, to court, saying the district broke the Equal Access Act, a law passed the previous year that required secondary public schools to provide equal access for its students to all extracurricular clubs. The students argue that denying the Bible study club went against the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the Constitution. The U.S. District Court for the District of Nebraska ruled in favor of the school district, arguing the district did not violate First Amendment nor 14th Amendment rights. They also said the district didn't break the Equal Access Act. The students appealed to the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which reversed the decision of the lower courts. While the Court of Appeals said the Equal Access Act could have been written better, it said it was constitutional. More importantly, it said the district was taking away the students' First Amendment rights by not allowing them to meet on school premises during, quote, non-instructional time. Westside Community Schools appealed to the Supreme Court. The core issue was whether or not the Equal Access Act violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment by its requirement that schools allow clubs not related to stuff being taught in schools. Were religious clubs protected under that as well? The court heard oral arguments on January 9th, 1990, but it wasn't until June 4th that they decided. In an 8-1 decision, the court sided with Mergens, and the rest of the students, saying the Bible study club could meet, but that their sponsor could not get paid for it. If the sponsor got paid, this might seem like an endorsement of one religion, which would break the Establishment Clause. It upheld the Equal Access Act. It also said that when public schools allow any clubs, including those that have little to do with what's being taught in classes at the school, meet on school grounds, they have to open it to all clubs, religious or not. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor wrote the opinion, quote, allowing students to meet on campus and discuss religion is constitutional because it does not amount to, quote, state sponsorship of a religion, unquote. Westside Community Board of Education v. Mergens didn't settle the separation of church and state issue for sure, but it did settle the right for students to use public facilities to talk about their religion as.
So again, another really good example of differentiating. This was, when is this actually allowed? If this had been during class or during school hours and stuff, then this would not have been allowed, okay? Because it would be seen as sponsoring or promoting a certain religion. But outside of school hours, so after school, and stuff, to use a public facility, all are welcome, right? So they can't be exclusive, okay? And making sure that there's no actual public funds going toward it, so that the state is not appearing to support a particular religion versus another. Okay, and stuff. So this was very groundbreaking for, again, that separation of church and state, but also within school grounds, those guidelines. Within instructional time, absolutely not. Outside of instructional time, and as long as public resources, money is not being used for it, the ability of right to assemble, and not discriminating against one particular religious group or belief. So again, for and from freedom of religion and stuff. So this is a really groundbreaking case as well. Okay, so board versus education. They sided with the students and the teacher in this case, that they had the right to use the facilities because it was after school, and therefore not discriminating based on religion or political nature. Because they claim to take a side is then to say that you are cutting off or not allowing people access possibly to a religion, which is against the Bill of Rights. All right, so while you're doing that, we're going to go through the checking for understanding questions. All right, and okay, here we go. I was like, where are they all? Okay. In order to meet the standards of the Lemon test, a law must meet all the following criteria except, so not promote or prohibit religion, avoid excessive entanglement between church and state, and have a secular purpose. So the key, in order for it, all the following criteria except not allow public money to go to religious establishment or activity. The right to assemble is foundation in which part of the U.S. Constitution? So it's the Bill of Rights, the right to assemble that's in the very First Amendment. The rights listed in the Bill of Rights fall into two general categories, so civil liberties and civil rights, okay, of those accused of crime. So remember, civil rights are protection from government overreach. Civil liberties are protection by the government. So one is from and one is by, referring to the government and us individual citizens. The right to petition is one of the most important clauses in the First Amendment. Which one of the following is not an accurate statement about the right to petition? The government is required to address issues brought by a citizen. So you can protest, you could stand outside. When we went to Washington, D.C. 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, all kinds of people protesting outside, different groups and things like that, but they are not required to come out and address it. So you have the right to protest, but that doesn't mean that the government is required to address it. The Supreme Court has ruled that young people's First Amendment rights may be limited in school, okay? So again, outside of school, you have those rights, but within school or the context of school or school-sponsored events, so going on that school trip, it was paid for within the school, it was considered a school event, you are going to be limited. You do not have the same rights as when you are outside school grounds, school hours, or school resources. So for example, if you're on an athletic team, that would still apply to you, right? When you are on the school bus going to your sports, game or something like that, getting off the bus, or a band competition, anything like that, traveling, even while you're traveling with the school resources, school time and stuff, you would be limited in your rights. All of these are examples of the right to petition except. So holding a vigil in response to national tragedy, occupying public space, free speech zones, 10,000 signatures collected. Waging an armed struggle against the state. Yeah, that is not part of that. So peaceful protest, all of these would be considered passive or peaceful protest. When it is violent or restricting other people's rights, then that's going to be the limitation. All right, let's go to civil liberties then. All right, let's take a look at civil liberties. What kind of issues are typically addressed in freedoms of assembly cases? All right, so looking at civil liberties. So whether or not people are able to peacefully assemble, that their words and actions are not harmful or inflammatory, causing others to behave violently. So rioting is not a right. So there is a difference. Protest, chanting, things like that, but rioting is different. So rioting, burning public property or disrupting public property would be considered part of that. You do not have the right to do that under the Bill of Rights and the freedom of assembly protection. And sometimes it's a fine line. Sometimes it's a fine line. We've definitely seen that in the last, we've seen that in different eras, civil rights movement. We've seen it in the 90s. We've seen a lot of protests or more elevated protests and stuff. Some going into rioting in the last 5-6 years and stuff like that. So you see these waves of, depending on what the topics are and what the movements are, where sometimes it's a real fine line how people define protest versus rioting. How have Supreme Court rulings defined relationships between the U.S. government and religious institutions? So Lemon versus Kurzman, 1971, they applied the Lemon test. If laws meet these criteria, it does not violate the Establishment Clause. So it has a secular intent, does not intentionally advise or inhibit a religion, and does not excessively entangle government and religion. And again, these will be often very open to interpretation. So what one person might see as excessive entanglement between government and religion, others think any association between government and religion would be entanglement. So someone who's very religious probably would think something's not very entangling, and someone who's not religious at all is probably going to look at any association between government and religion, right, and say that's an entanglement. So oftentimes perspective is going to vary how people view this. So freedom of petition. Freedom of petition is guaranteed in the Constitution, the right to assemble, the right to get signatures, the right to carry signs, the right to chant, the right to walk, and stuff like that. But again, on that boundary line of making sure that we aren't rioting or hurting public property or people. Freedom of religion. So again, freedom of religion and freedom from religion. So the government cannot impose a religion on its people and stuff, but also the government cannot restrict religion and stuff. So now they can in certain places. So for example, like a school, public school. So public school is supposed to be free of religion, right? We could talk about religion, but the goal is, like when I taught world history, we always talked about religion, but the goal was learning the history of religion. We were not promoting any one religion or chastising any one religion, right? So discussion of a topic is fine, or depending on the topic and maybe the depth with which you do it. But once you're promoting or pushing or discouraging or talking defamatory, that's where that line is going to be. Freedom of assembly. Okay, so the right to freedom of assembly, like we said, coming together, petitioning, protesting, chanting. But again, as long as there's no threats toward property, toward people, or actual acts toward property or people, that would be considered violent or destructive. Freedom of the press. This is really, really big. The ability of our newspapers to print things about the government that might go against the government. Watergate, President Nixon in the late 70s, 80s, stuff, who later resigned, broke a huge scandal, basically showing that the president and members of his party were involved in a terrible scandal, illegal, and think in a lot of governments, they would shut that down. They would keep that from coming out all the time. But it is important that we have transparency and that the press it just has to be true, so you can't do defamatory things just because you want to. There has to be evidence. It has to be true. Okay, freedom of speech, like we talked about. So freedom of speech comes in many different forms. So the ability to say what I want, to print what I want. We see this with social media, right? To express ourselves and stuff, and cannot be forced into, an agreed upon opinion just because the government wants it. All right, there are a lot of review questions for this one. So we'll keep going. All right. The First Amendment prevents Congress from doing what? And that's prohibiting or inhibiting any faith. So I can't promote a faith, but I also can't restrict a faith. What does the excessive exercise clause of the First Amendment guarantee? Individuals can practice any religion within the limits of the law. So of course, if a religion is like, oh, we're going to do human sacrifice, like that's not okay, you know? So, you know, even if they claim, oh, the early Aztecs did it or something like that, no, you know, like that's not okay. So obviously there's limits of harm and it has to be within the confines of the law. So if a religion was to promote child sexual abuse or something like that, you know, no, that is not okay. So it can't violate the law and there's limits to that. But beyond that, freedom of religion, if you want to worship a tree, if you want to, I don't know, if I want to go and bow to the Dr. Pepper, I have the right to do it. Okay. No, I don't bow to the Dr. Pepper, but I do love me some Dr. Pepper. So maybe I do. Madison's primary reason for writing this letter was to convince Virginia lawmakers not to pass a bill that would have given state funding to a particular religion's teacher. And again, once you start funding something of religion, then you are promoting that religion. You're not only endorsing religion in general, but depending on what that religious position is, you are inadvertently endorsing that religion. And the whole goal was to have that separation of church and state. In Madison's language, what is an establishment? Okay, it's a religious organization. Compared to other other fundamental rights, how does Madison view the free exercise of religion? Okay, it is equal in importance to other fundamental rights. So it's just as important as other rights, because if I have freedom of speech, but I'm not allowed to practice my chosen religion, or I'm forced to practice a religion, then am I really free? And isn't religion or freedom from religion in a lot of people's lives probably one of the most important things, if you're very religious or if you're very against religion or if you're just kind of but the ability to have that and to change your mind and not have the government influencing or pressuring you on that is really important. Freedom of speech has one of its first legal challenges in America with the Sedition Act that was passed in order to stop newspapers from printing articles critical of President John Adams and his administration during the quasi-war. All the following are limits to freedom of speech, except one cannot speak out against the government policies during wartime. So there are cases where there's restriction of speech. So one of them is during times of war. And when we say that, we have to define war, all out war, like World War I, World War II, you know, things like that, where full efforts are going in. And so outright rebelling against that could compromise the very security of the country. So there are times when government can and does suppress or limit speech. And that would be one example, because it's considered a threat to national security. Why is prior restraint seen as an unconditional limit to, unconstitutional limit to a free press? It prevents new outlets from printing a story in the first place. Sorry, I'm moving fast because we still have a couple sections. Information published by the press can limit all the following, except if it is critical to the president, or critical of the president. Sorry. The right to peaceably assemble enables people to do all the following except. So block roads with crowds, so long as people are orderly and nonviolent. So you have the right to do these things, but you cannot block traffic. You can't block roads, okay? So again, your right to protest, if you're infringing on other people's rights, then you've crossed that line, okay? So like blocking a freeway or blocking a street or something like that. Sorry, you don't have the right to do that. So we see this actually quite a bit in Europe right now. Remember the climate protest? That's become really a hot topic. People that will like glue themselves. Have you seen that? Like glued themselves to the pavement? Do people have the right to remove them? And in some cases, they're literally having to like dig up concrete to remove these protests because they literally like block traffic. But it's led to, I was reading an article, it's led to some violent interactions because people get frustrated because they can't pass. You know, they need to drive to work or something like that, and these people don't move. So here in the United States, that would be something that they aren't allowed to do. When people assemble, the government has the right to maintain order. So something the government can do is maintain order, okay? So you have the right to protest, but if it's getting heated, if a counter argument and people are throwing things, slashing things, so they have the right to keep it peaceful. So they don't necessarily have the right to break it up, but they have the right to keep it peaceful. Now, if it's not peaceful or it's escalating, and people's safety's in jeopardy, then they do have the right to break it up. And again, oftentimes that becomes very controversial, right? Because one media outlet that supports the protest will say, oh, they violated. Another media outlet that maybe doesn't will say, no, they have the right to, they did this. So sometimes the facts actually get kind of lost in that. And we see that oftentimes the debate of when is it right to actually break it up. Okay, so civil rights, let's go to civil rights. Do you believe continued progress is still needed in regards to civil rights protection? Why or why not? This is your opinion, so make sure that whatever side you fall on, that you explain on what you think. So for this response, you are going to answer this one independently, okay? I'm fine with 2 to 3 sentences. And so what I'm looking for is yes or no, okay? So yes, we need continued progress when it comes to regards to civil rights protection. So remember, that's civil rights protection is freedom from the government. So freedom from government oversight. Okay. Or no, we don't. And then say why. So yes, here's why. So give instances. I think that we need more protection from the government because, give 1 or 2 examples. No, I think we don't need more protection from the government because maybe you feel something's gotten out of hand, or the government needs to step in more in a certain case. So pick a lane, yes or no, and then give 1 to 2 reasons why. Any questions on that one? Sorry, I'm moving fast. I'm trying to get through number 7. Give me a thumbs up. You're with me. Okay, you're with me? Okay, so that one, 2 to 3 sentences. Yes, give reasons why. No, give reasons why. All right. There's no right or wrong, just as long as you're giving the evidence to support it. Okay, so that's what's really important. Okay. Civil rights movement, when we think of civil rights, we think back to the 50s and 60s, right? And ending of segregation, Jim Crow laws, and stuff. And probably the most prominent figure from that movement, though there are many, is Martin Luther King Jr. fighting for those equal rights. Malcolm X is another who kind of later, and so Martin Luther King Jr. took more of a peaceful protest approach. Malcolm X kind of took more of a know when we're being violated and stuff. You know, he disagreed with that method and pushed for a more progressive movement and push movement. Other examples of civil rights are not always race related. So it can be gender related. It could be movement related. And another example would be farmers movement. Okay. So civil rights, protection from government and stuff. Again, when we think of it, we think of the well-known movements, but really civil rights can apply to any subgroup. So any subgroup that is struggling and feeling that the government is overreaching and violating their rights. Okay, because of time, I'm just going to go over these. So civil rights are those rights that apply to all citizens. Okay, so all citizens, which is clarified in the 14th Amendment, right? Updated after the Civil War, 13th Amendment ending slavery, 14th Amendment, then clarifying and broadening what does it mean to be a citizen after the end of slavery. All the following are associated with post-World War II, so meaning after World War II civil rights movements, except Brown versus Board of Education, so ending segregation in schools based on race. Was after World War II. Martin Luther King Jr., that was after World War II. That was the 1950s, 60s. The bus boycotts, okay? So that was going to be after World War II. The founding of NAACP, that was actually before World War II. So that's the one movement that started before World War II, and these other 3 are going to be after World War II. The constitutional amendment that has played a key role in clarifying equality per law is the 14th Amendment. So again, freeing of slaves was one thing, but then now you have to reclassify what does it mean to be a citizen. So the 14th Amendment, many people argue, is one of the most important civil rights amendments in clarifying and who has freedom and ensuring those protections from government overreach. This piece of legislation banned discrimination based on race in public places and hiring, and that was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So again, going further to protect civil rights from government overreach or company overreach. Okay, so we're going to go to the next page. We're going to take a look at the primary source and then we'll end class. So remember, the primary source is going to be a document that is a firsthand account of the topic. Okay, so in this case, it's going to be Brown versus Board of Education, probably one of the most historical or referenced Supreme Court cases. And it's super important when you talk about civil rights, okay? Probably one of the most foundational cases when it talks about civil rights, okay? And this has to do with segregation within schools, okay? So let's go down here. I had a short video. I don't have time to show it, okay? So this document summarizes, so we'll go through the graph. And then if you want to do more reading on it, great groundbreaking case, and stuff. So I encourage you to read this. All right, but because of time, we'll go through the chart. So Brown versus Board of Education court opinion. So what is this about? So it's Brown versus Board of Education about the separate but equal doctrine, okay? Are you truly separate when you are are you truly equal when you are separate? That's what this whole case is about, right? And they're arguing when you are separating students based on skin color, you are truly not equal. So concept, this deals with rights and liberties, which is the topic of our lesson. This is a unanimous opinion. So that means with the Supreme Court, in not many cases, but in rare case, we had total agreement from the 8 justices or 9 justices, sorry, on this case. And I think that's really powerful because a lot of times you don't have unanimous. New vocabulary, sanction, doctrine. So what is this about? The first half of the opinion explains on the issue of dealing with children being separated in schools based on skin color, so white students from other races, and living, playing near their schools. Is this policy harming children and into adulthood? Did it go in? Oh, it didn't. Okay, let me try that again. Sorry about that. There we go. What is this about? So Chief Justice Warren stated that you cannot go back in time with the 14th Amendment was adopted or to Plessy when they wrote this doctrine, but that by today's standards, which is in the 1950s, segregation in public school deprives children of equal protection of the law. Different resources, different buildings, different way of doing things, not acceptable. So this was definitely the beginning then of desegregating because, you know, again, this was not just in schools, right? This was common in restaurants and buses and drinking fountains. In every segment of society, there was segregation, okay? So this played out with schools, desegregating them, but also became a trickle effect then in every segment of society to reduce and end Jim Crow laws, okay? So bringing it all together, the Supreme Court overturned the prior ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson, which said you could be separate but equal, and stated that separate but equal was legal, constitutional in their ruling. Almost 60 years later, Brown versus Board of Education reversed that, said no, you cannot be separate and claim equality. Okay, when you are separating people based on skin color, that is separate, that is not equal. All right, and by discriminating public education, they opened the door for other discriminations in public, which we saw, again, restaurants, buses, drinking fountains, theaters, every segment of society creating separate areas, which oftentimes, most of the time, right, in pretty much every case, favored whites over other races, right? So sitting at the front of the bus versus the back. If you've ever seen pictures of drinking fountains back in the day, the white drinking fountain, nice and big, you know, the other really small. So even though this whole idea of separate but equal, when you actually look at it in layman's terms, it was never equal. And there was so much disparity and discrimination as a result of that. So what you need to do, and then I'm going to let you go, okay, is you need to take a look at this article and find a quote that supports what this is about, okay? You could probably find it in the first 2 pages, okay? That in this case, you know, like the 14th Amendment described shortly after the adaptation, even right here, all right? This could be really good. Why the separate but equal did not make its appearance in the courts until the 1989, involving not education but transportation. So find a quote that supports the explanation of the document, okay? So 2 things you need to do. Find the quote to go in right here, okay? And then respond to, do you believe continued progress still needs to be made in the civil rights protection? Yes, here's why. No, here's why. Give me 1 or 2. All right. You do not need to do 8 and 9. So let me repeat that. You do not need to do 8 and 9. You can delete those. Here is the review sheet for the quiz, okay? The quiz and the notebook are due next Tuesday, okay, when we come back. So they're going to be the first assignments due. So go ahead and open that up. They're going to be the first assignments due for second quarter. Okay, so again, key vocab and then going through each part, and those key checking for understanding questions are also answered in here. Okay, so definitely review those before you take the quiz. Okay, all right, I'm sorry, I know I'm running over time, so I'll wrap this up. All right, the notebook and the module 3 lesson 1 notebook and quiz are both going to be due next Tuesday, the first day we come back, okay, for the quarter. Make sure you turn in your attendance assignment on Friday. If you need anything, you can come see me from 9 to 11 on Friday. I'll be finalizing quarter 1 grades, and then quarter 2 grades will start going in on Monday. Okay. But remember, they're not due till the 10th because there is no school on Monday because the staff is going to be developed. All right. I know this was really fast. If you need anything, go back and play the video again. Have a wonderful day. Sorry for keeping you over. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. I know it was a lot today.